Okay, so it's 10:40, so I think we should restart the meeting. And Terry, the microphone is yours. Can't say the floor when it's virtual, although I'm sure you have a floor that you're underneath you, or you'd be disappearing from view. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So if we move on to the next slide, what it highlights is the key people issues that I'm going to be talking about today. It's probably worthwhile noting, as Jonathan alluded beforehand, that the majority of these items are in our integrated performance report. The ones which aren't to a significant degree will be employee relations and workforce planning, but the other significant areas are around capacity and capability within my function, around STAM, statutory and mandatory training, around values-based appraisal compliance, sickness absence, and the cultural and leadership piece. So Neil, if we move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about capability and capacity issues. So as we all know, there's been a historic performance and delivery issues that have come out through various numbers of reports at board level, at TME level, and even within the function itself. And when I look at the size of the function, the number of people in the function, what I see is that we're a significant outlier in model hospital benchmarking data for quality, around performance, and functional costs. And when we compare that with Shelford, we're around like second lowest, or at the kind of like lowest performing quartile for our benchmarking. And that's significant for me. So the underinvestment around significantly impacts our ability to deliver around a number of the trust people objectives as well. And addressing that is actually one of my objectives. And the investment case is it's been discussed at an executive level. And we're looking to push that through to make sure that we have the minimum resource required in order to deliver a fit for purpose people function. If we move on to the next slide, the other key issue for me is around our values-based appraisal compliance. What we see is that our failure to achieve our targets is also on our risk register. Our compliance is about 70%, with our target being at 85%. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. Some of it is the capacity of workforce during COVID. Also, the reporting and notification requirements were also paused during wave one. There's also an issue about the lack of ownership and accountability for appraisals process historically, along with some of the system issues and also some of the reporting inefficiencies as well. We also see that there is insufficient training capacity to upskill the managers in order to deliver this, and this is also part of the business case, which we're discussing with execs at the moment. Now, we're putting a number of actions in place to address this, and these include increased communication, making sure that the notifications are working more effectively, having frequently asked questions and how-to guides, as well as ensuring that there are divisional activities are taking place as well in terms of data quality and training availability as well. We also need to make sure that the appraisal policy is updated appropriately, so that there's a greater focus on responsibilities. The new system will also help with that as well, but also we want to change our reporting time frames as well, because at the moment our reporting time frames is all through the year rather than having an appraisal window, and we want to make sure that there's an appraisal window which enables us to kind of like put a proper focus on appraisal, and hopefully for that to align with appraisal process for the execs as well. If we move on to the next slide, it focuses on statutory mandatory training. And again, this is another item that's on our risk register as well. And what we see is that compliance is at 80% when our target is 85%. And again, the causes for that are very similar to appraisals in terms of notification requirements of being paused during wave one, system as well not being fit for purpose, and they're also being recording and reporting inefficiencies, but also our policy again is not fit for purpose, and that results in a lack of understanding of the requirements and the responsibilities as well. So there are a number of actions which we also highlighted in the integrated performance report, which talk about again around communications, aligning our policies with the UK core skills framework, around the system, and also working with the HRBPs in the divisions to make sure that there is a particular focus on working flexibly. If we move on to the next item, it's around the level of sickness absence. And when we look at sickness absence, we see that actually it has been increasing recently. It's currently at 3.7%. And part of that has been an issue around the COVID cases. When you take out the COVID cases, it kind of is roughly around 3.1% as well. But we're beginning to see another increase with wave 2 in COVID absences. We're seeing now that it's the numbers have moved up slightly from where they were, nearing more the 200 mark for COVID-related absences. And we also see that long-term sickness and stress is a significant issue as well. We've also got insufficient OH capacity to deal effectively with managing the risk and risk assessments, the advice that's needed in relation to ongoing long-term sickness and short-term staff COVID testing and flu vaccinations. And also we've had no wellbeing resource to design, develop and coordinate and deliver a holistic health and wellbeing strategy as well. So we're working closely with First Care, around occupational health and line managers to address this. We've got team wellbeing leads in place, and we're looking to increase that number from over 100 to 600. We've also working closely with Psych Med and Here for Health to assist staff with psychological and physical self-care, and again working with the divisions to focus on those long-term cases. I'm going to move over to the next slide, which is about employee relations. And here we see that there are some significant issues in the management of our ER cases across the organisations. They include lack of effective tracking of ER cases across the whole trust, inconsistent management of suspensions, lack of appropriate governance and monitoring of cases, inappropriate use of legal advice. And there are examples of a number of cases that have been poorly managed as well. We also need to make sure that we have appropriately trained investigators with dedicated time to complete investigations to a high standards. So we've developed an action plan to address these issues, and also the additional resource will help deal with some of the issues that I've highlighted. If we move on to the next slide, workforce planning is also another area of risk with known capacity and capability issues. So we know that the workforce planning submissions have mostly been retrofitted rather than driven by local teams in the planning process. There's been a lack of workforce planning capability across HR teams and clinical teams. Also, there's the heavy reliance on traditional roles rather than new roles and people working at the top of their license. We'll see that there's weak establishment control and understanding of exactly where their staff are, and our systems aren't talking effectively to one another. So one of the actions that we've put in place is we're getting an interim workforce planning expert to support capability not only across team but also across Bob as well. And we're going to more effectively try to integrate activity, workforce finance, and link in with overall business planning. And also new establishment controls are being put in place to ensure that we have one person on one post to better manage our staffing post vacancies, and budget management and employee changes as well. And my final piece before I'll stop for questions is around culture and leadership, which is on the next slide here. So it's quite clear that we've got insufficient skills, capability, and resources within the trust to deliver the culture and leadership aspects of our strategy, also of our objectives, and also the NHS people plan. And when we focus on what some of that means, it's around implementing a consistent multi-professional leadership behaviours framework, around embedding the Athena journey across our teams, around designing and delivering a culturally sensitive, holistic health and wellbeing programme, embedding the values-based interview appraisal and the conversation to actually align with actual behaviours, to enable a rolling programme of engagement and recognition to co-design solutions to make OUH a great place to work and improve staff engagement, and to deliver our comprehensive equality and diversity and inclusion plan. So additional resource to address these issues have all been put into the business case, and I feel with the additional resource that we have, that we're proposing, we will be able to make headway into all of the issues that I've outlined. I think I'll stop there for questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Terry. And we have a little over 5 minutes before we'll take our break, and we can come back as need be after that. So I have Claire first, followed by Paula.
Thanks, Chair. Terry, it's really good to see this pulled together in one place, so thank you for that. I've got lots of questions, but I'll just try and do the sort of top ones really, because I know we're short on time. Are you clear, first of all, about what the increase in investment needs to be to get us into the right place, and is that budgeted?
So I'm clear about exactly what it is, the minimum and the cost. It's not budgeted yet. There's an investment case that needs to go through a process. We'll be looking to get board approval as soon as possible. It would be good if we could get that in December, but I'm clear on the numbers.
Okay. And will that be over 1 year or more than 1 year?
So it'll be over more than 1 year, but the way that I've scheduled it is that actually once we've got the right investment in place, we'll be able to get efficiencies in year 3 and 4.
Okay, thank you. And then just some comments really quickly on appraisal. I think that there is a combination needed of both engagement, which we don't have, and consequences, which I'm not sure we have. And I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about sort of consequences for not completing.
So we currently have some consequences in place, but the issue is how effectively we put them, and how effectively we do that. So part of the issue is that actually there are a number of things that we need to fix first. So before we put those consequences in place, we need to make sure that the system that they have to do appraisals is effective. We need to make sure that actually the reporting is correct. Otherwise, people will say, well, you can't do that because we haven't got the basics in place. And so that's why we're focused on, and we have invested in a new system. We had an engagement piece, and the organisation decided that they want to call it My Knowledge Hub. And so once we've got that in place and we've dealt with some of the basic issues, I think we'll be in a better place to hold people to account. But we do hold the divisions to account monthly in our divisional reviews as well. But we'll be able to make a step change once we have the basics in place to facilitate that.
Okay. So thanks, Terry. Just one more observation, really, more than anything else. At the moment, to me, OUH feels like quite a sort of policy-led organisation, and that's sort of understandable in the context of the number of staff we have. But it is a sort of, it's part of the sort of journey or the life cycle, if you like, to me, because the policies really, we need to get to a place where the policies are taken as read, they're appropriate, and we start to address people in a different language, which is much more about inclusiveness. And quite a good example of that for me was the sort of the policy with regard to pensions that she recently put in place. It wasn't necessarily coming from a tax point of view. It was much more about feeling that people had been listened to. And I would like to see us do much more of that. And I think if we move towards that, we'll have a much more engaged workforce.
Oh, I completely agree with you, Claire. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's a journey, but I think that's where we should be getting to. I think there is something about actually being clear, everybody understanding and being clear about what the ask is, and doing that, we need to engage with our workforce as well, with our people to determine what that should be as well. So I completely agree with you.
Paula.
Thank you. Really welcome this. As Claire said, great to see all these points, but very hard to disagree with all the actions that you have set out. You've answered my first question in terms of, they're both timescale questions, because it seems so important to get on with this now. You said timescale for getting to the conclusion of the investment case, December, I think it's.
I'd like it to be December, yes.
But I'm supporting that, really, because I think we need not to let this sit around. So anything that we need to do to help with that process be good to do. The other timescale issue is around the new learning management system, Totara, which seems so fundamental to getting the first 2 or 3 items on your list absolutely right. It says in the integrated performance report, first stage of that go live February. Are we clear that we have got the resource in the people and the digital team to make that happen, given we're heading into a hard winter and second COVID spike, etc.? Are you confident you've got the people that can do that? Because I completely agree with you, without it, we're not going to make that progress.
Yeah,
Terry, you have a minute to answer this, and then we begin to focus our minds.
I'll be succinct. So thank you for the support around the business case. Yes, I do think, because we had a separate business case for Totara, which included the resources that we needed to deliver it. But we're going to need to project manage that carefully to make sure that we do get it done by February.
But have we got those resources in place, or have we just got the approval?
So we've got the temporary staff in place. We had to go and get some temporary staff in order to.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I have Jason and Sam still to come, but I think it's shortly before 11 o'clock, and we should just focus our minds. Rather like during COVID, Oxford pulled itself together during the wars to provide service. I understand that what's now the NOC was set up in huts during the First World War as an orthopaedic hospital. So I think as we move into a period of reflection, we are remembering both those who gave their lives and also those who committed their professional skills and expertise to support fellow citizens and those from all countries across the world. So I will just in a moment turn off my camera and start timing a 2 minutes, which will take us across the 11 o'clock. And we will resume the agenda when we've had an opportunity to reflect on those momentous times. Thank you, everyone. So, having reflected about the past and people's contributions, we're back to our people and the workforce. And Paula, I think you were next in my queue for a question for Terry or comment.
I think I've finished. I just hadn't put my hand down. Apologies for that.
Sorry. Jason.
Thank you, Chair. So I just thought it would be helpful to play back some of the conversations Terry and I had on process. So I think realistically what we can achieve is a business case that goes through TME either late November or early December, investment committee review in December, and a recommendation to the January board. That will also align with the a good stage in our planning for the totality of next year, and I would hope to be able to give the board a readout on sort of the other major business cases that colleagues were proposing for investment, so we can actually make a view on these in the round. I should say, you know, I've broadly validated the principle with Terry that we underspend compared to our peers. So we spend less than 5 of the Shelford trusts and more than 3 of them. So, you know, we do underspend, and you could probably, just on the benchmarking, I mean, to size it for people, you could rationalise an additional spend of between £500,000 and £1 million a year quite easily, and benchmarking probably won't give you a readout more precise than that because it's obviously got, you know, a natural limitation. I think one of the issues the board will need to grapple with through the process of looking at this is we're probably going to be required to make £10 to £20 million worth of cost savings by the central bodies next year. So we'll need to sort of save that amount of money anyway. There's a good benefits case for this, and Terry and I will bring some quantification of that for you, because things like improving sickness absence and some of the things that you'd naturally expect to fall out of a better HR function have a direct monetary benefit. I do suspect that what we'll find is there is 1 to 2 years worth of net investment before we get to a net positive position. So we'll have a business case which, if we were a private business with liquidity, would be, I would think, very strongly recommended. The challenge we will have in a kind of NHS control total regime is in the first 1 to 2 years as a board, we'll either have to accept making a larger deficit than we otherwise would have done, or cutting expenditure in other areas. And I will give the board, you know, a readout on my assessment of how much NHS England Improvement would tolerate a larger deficit, and I'll give the board hopefully a collective view from the executives of a readout of what our cost reduction options are. But clearly we don't sit as a board projecting a sort of £5 or £10 million surplus with the ability to simply say let's make a smaller surplus in the first couple of years of net investment. So that'll be a bit of a context for how I think we'll have to look at this. But I mean, the principle I completely support.
Thanks, Jason. I don't want to preempt those discussions. I think it's important to pick up that. I've got Sam and then Anne.
It was just a brief share of some information for the board around a piece of work that the exec are just concluding, which is an education spend review across the organisation, with one of the key priority areas around investment in leadership and management training. So that piece of work we've done in partnership with the charity. So the finance director for the Oxford Hospitals charity has been on that group, specifically to understand our current income, spend and governance, so that they're well placed for a bid to them for additional development. So that's concluding with an aim to enable Terry's team to then commission a trust-wide leadership and culture piece.
Thanks, Sam. Anne.
Well, that's good to hear. I just wanted to say, it's a sort of a general comment, really. I mean, obviously, I've been on the trust board forever, and you know, arguably our most important asset is the people in the trust, and we have some amazing people, we have some amazing talent, but never since I've been on the board have I ever felt totally confident that well, I have not felt confident that our sort of HR leadership, should I say, our people leadership has been where it needs to be.
And certainly ever since I've been around, we've sort of limped from one leader to another in this area. So it's very nice to be able to see Terry here and to see Terry having addressed the issues that most of the issues that I've been aware of ever since I've been in the trust. Now, we may have not got fully the solution yet, but it's a really great place to start, to have identified the key areas where we need to focus, and all of those areas I would agree with. So I'm very encouraged by this, and looking forward to the next stage. And we have to find a way of affording it. And that doesn't mean we have to overspend necessarily. We have to find a way to finance this because it's absolutely critical in my view.
Thanks very much, Anne. I'm going to try and move it on rather than invite Terry to respond to that. So I think we take from this, we all recognise the importance of this for us to do right by our staff, and that enables us to deliver the care that our patients expect. I think, Terry, you've identified a set of challenges which are the challenges that the board recognises. So we take assurance from the fact that what is on your agenda is what the board thinks needs to be focused on. We've recognised that there are some challenges in investing in order to deliver that, and that will come through the normal processes in due course. But I think the key thing is this has enabled us to pull together the agenda and get a sense that there's leadership that is embracing it and addressing it, whereas and I think most people have felt previously that it's been fragmented, and so we've not been confident about the workforce agenda being pulled together within a single sort of leadership oversight. So I think that's encouraging. I think we have lots of little successes, which we have reported to us regularly, but it hasn't added up to a picture of us having a strategic sense of what we need to do. So I think that's what I take from this is the big step forward is that this enables us to get a more strategic view of the challenges, which in turn helps us prioritise both within your agenda, Terry, but also between the investment we need in relation to workforce and other calls on our money, which of course is not to take away the scrutiny process that need to go with all business cases, and we'll come back to the board in due course. But I think the key for this is we won't succeed unless we pull this agenda together, and that's what I take from this item, that we have now pulled that together and we'll be able to get stronger assurance of it going forward. So I'm very grateful to that. Okay, we should move on. Megan, would you like, I don't know if Keith is either with us or about to join us, would you like to take the R&D report next and then pick up the series afterwards so that you don't keep Keith waiting?
Happy to. I signed with Keith. I know that he does clinical work on a Wednesday morning. Keith, are you on this call?
Yes, I am here. Jonathan, Megan,
Great.
thank you.
So we can, thank you, Chair. So I'll start, and then Keith will obviously add and add the detail as required. So the first thing to say is that this annual report actually demonstrates the huge amount of work and activity in research and development, both within the BRC and OUH itself. And you know, I am just so proud of this stunning report. It is just fantastic, and it also actually highlights our partnership with the university, which is going from strength to strength. In terms of, I talked about the trials, and I talked about our plans to increase and how much we contribute to the urgent public health and the COVID trials. The other thing that I'd like to really just say is about the performance metrics, and we are very happy to talk about that should there be a question. But you'll see that we adapted the time to target metric after it was stopped by NIHR, and actually there are some issues that we highlighted last year in terms of pharmacy, which Keith has worked very hard on with the team to get those delays out of the picture. But sometimes there are so many amendments to trials that actually the team spend a lot of time going through those amendments, and we will continue to work work harder to improve the metrics. But in terms of the achievements and the governance, this is absolutely fantastic and requires recognition. So Keith, do you want to add to that?
No, thank you very much for those comments, Meghana. I mean, it is a privilege to work with both university and trust colleagues in this enormous endeavour. And perhaps just a couple of comments, if I may. I think that the overall effort, and it's exemplified by our joint response to the COVID pandemic, is that the partnership that we have between the university and the trust puts us in such a great place to be able to respond to challenges in a way that is incredibly rapid, so we can do things at short notice, we can do things comprehensively, and we can do things globally. And that's because we have an infrastructure and a way of working which is ready to go. It's ready to respond to any challenge, and that capability, I think, is something that is right to recognise, and it does require us, meaning you at board level and all of us across the organisations, to constantly support and to recognise. Just a word about where we are right now with our research activity. We are supporting 20 of the nationally designated urgent public health COVID-19 studies in the trust. We're also supporting another 20 local priority COVID-19 clinical research studies. And we've also managed to resume, after the pause, during the lockdown, there was 100% pause of non-COVID activity. We've managed to resume 650 clinical research studies that are the ones that have been prioritised as necessary for patient care and for other research priorities. So the activity has already resumed. And the other two things I wanted to recognise, if I may, the first thing is that we do need to look to the future. In this coming year, we'll be looking forward to the renewal of 2 BRCs in Oxford. One is the large OUH hosted BRC, and the other is our sister BRC hosted by Oxford Health, which focuses on mental health. We need to take advantage of the newly designated Academic Health Science Centre, which is Oxford Academic Health Partners, which I now direct, and there are fantastic opportunities for us to work more closely, not just with obviously the University of Oxford, but with Oxford Brookes and with Oxford Health in research, but also in areas such as training and education of nurses and allied health professions. And finally, we do need to always make sure that we are investing and we are developing new capabilities rather than just celebrating what we've been able to do. And I think in the future, it's really exciting to work closely with university colleagues on expanding our capabilities for advanced therapy research. So this is cell and gene therapy. It's taking advantage of the developments on the Churchill campus for early phase clinical trials, first in man, vaccine development, manufacturing of biologics. So this is something that I think we really need to look at. But perhaps that's just enough comments from me, and Jonathan, happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, Meghana.
Sorry. The only other thing I wanted to add, Chair, was the increasing multi-professional involvement in research within OUH, which is absolutely fantastic. The appointment of Helen Walthall has made a huge difference, and we will continue to increase that involvement of therapists and nursing teams.
Thank you, Meghana. I spotted that too. It's very encouraging. Anne. It's an old hand, is it, Anne? Okay. I wonder if I could pick something up, Keith. I mean, I think there's fantastic stuff in this, and you've mentioned lots of reasons why I agree we should be really proud. You didn't particularly mention, but it did strike me that the public engagement work and the making visible this work to members of the public through the public talks and I think is really important. We should be very proud of that. I didn't see in this report something that I've got occasional flack about, which is about trial registration and publication of results and also other elements of transparency, like our ability to reuse data, to make it available for people for reanalysis, to confirm integrity and the like. And some of you will know that Ben Goldacre has been pursuing all parts of the system for improving on this, and his tracker suggests that in Oxford we're not reporting all our results. Now, I've pick this up with Megan, and I know that we are doing those now, but I would quite like to understand how we think we're doing in terms of those sort of research integrity, transparency elements. So this is not about misconduct, but it's about our ability to do even better than we are with greater transparency.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Jonathan. So we did actually work closely with Ben Goldacre, and we held a full day workshop on trial transparency and reporting hosted by the Joint Research Office between the university and the trust, at which Ben was one of the speakers. And I think, Jonathan, that did signal a realization that we did need as a community to work harder at ensuring that trials were registered, number one, and that trials completed and reported their data. As you probably know, there are quite a few wrinkles in the trial tracker database, which Heather House in the CTRG and Chris Bray and his colleagues in the OUH R&D team have worked closely with. And I think we are now in a much better place. There is obviously a time lag between trials completing the last patient recruited and the analysis of the data and ultimately registering the results. But I think that issue is of much greater profile. It's understood by both researchers and also by host organizations such as ours. So that's been a very helpful interaction with Ben. I mean, Ben's great because he's obviously a fairly vociferous critic, using that word scientifically, but he's also a really helpful colleague, and we're very fortunate to have him in Oxford and to be someone who we can work with as a local colleague.
Thanks, Keith. I should say, in my previous capacity as chair of the Health Research Authority, I think I wrote to Bruno about this, and no, it's very clear that the Trust takes this very seriously. It's also clear it's not as easy to do as some people from outside think. Thank you. Gavin. If you're speaking, you're on mute, Gavin. That's better.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to put some perspective on this because, you know, when we sit on such activity, we probably don't realise how it matches up nationally. So I came back to Oxford 3 years ago from Imperial, and I can tell you the scale of activity here is much greater. The breadth of it is truly impressive. So the volume and actually the quality is really fantastic. I agree with Keith. We mustn't rest on our laurels here. We must continue looking at the horizon, reinventing ourselves. But actually, this is in my view, a really, really impressive operation. And Keith, you played a major part in shaping that as in your former role as head of the BRC.
Thanks, Gavin. I echo all of that. Keith, you want to respond? You don't think you did such a good role after all? You just like to correct the record? Keith, you've gone on to mute.
More just to thank the board and to sort of urge you to remember that, you know, this happens in our organisation because of the support of the board. And, you know, it's fantastic to work with Megan. She's got an enormous portfolio, but R&D is very important to us. So we do need the board to continually support the activity. It doesn't just happen because of the university's academic strengths. It doesn't just happen because it's good news and we want to do it. You know, this success reflects the board commitment to supporting research, and we need to continue to do that. And, you know, right now, for example, just to choose one area, this huge upheaval in trial activity means that the Trust's cash flow for R&D has been disrupted this year. So it's been fantastically helpful to work so closely with Jason and colleagues and to get such positive support in managing those changes in cash flow. So I wanted just to finish by thanking the board, but urging you to continue to support research and the relationship with our university colleagues as one of this organisation's top priorities.
Thank you, Keith. I don't think you need to have any worries about that. No, we've already, during the course of this meeting, seen in Bruno's report a whole series of activities that are going on in the Trust around the research. We've discussed the non-NHS income and the R&D funding as part of the finance, part of our integrated performance report. So it's absolutely central to our thinking that this is part of Oxford's ability to deliver excellent compassionate care and not an add-on. So I think you can be very confident that you have our continued support for that, for which we are also very grateful for contributions that you made in the past and are making now. We are, though, quite short for time, so we'll let you get back to other things, Keith, although you're very welcome to stay. It's a public meeting if you'd like to, but thank you very much for joining us. And I'll return to Meghana. We'll go back to the CIRI report, Meghana.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report for 1920, and I'm just going to make a few brief points and then I will be happy to take questions. So this highlights the serious incidents in terms of the numbers, but also details the categories in terms of diagnosis or treatment. We had 71 in the end, 71 serious investigations requiring investigation in the last year compared to 109 the year before. I think it's really important to remember that whilst we've done this reduced the number of serious incidents requiring investigation, at the same time we have increased our incident reporting rate from 49 per 1,000 bed days to 53.9 per 1,000 bed days. So this is a very good achievement for the Trust. This also shows a huge element of ownership and transparency, and the change to a very good learning culture. We've got to a point where our actions from series, because unless we complete the actions, we don't demonstrate learning and we don't reduce the incidents of those same serious incidents occurring again. So our actions have gone from, completed actions have gone from 50% to circa 88%. And Sam and I are very keen that these actions are effective in achieving the reduction and learning. So these actions should be more about simplification, standardization, automation, and computerization rather than educating or putting on a training course for someone. Those people-focused actions tend to be less effective. And there are some fantastic examples of effective actions within this report. Finally, I also want to say that in terms of transparency, I mean, who would have ever known, but it's actually happened that all our consultants are now very, very happy and keen to report things like return to theatres, which never were reported previously. And that is very good. So we know that patients who return to theatre after a surgical procedure, or people who are readmitted, or people who unexpectedly are admitted to intensive care are suffering moderate harm and therefore are eligible for duty of candour. And that is happening very regularly. And our duty of candour is applied 100% of the time for all those incidents that are eligible for duty of candour. And then lastly, I just want to end by saying that the safety huddles continue in every clinical area. I've seen those when I've walked around, and the teams are very focused in terms of the completion and compliance with WHO checklist, which now almost every month is almost at 99, if not 100%, which is a change from what it used to be. So I'm happy to take questions at that point, Chair.
Thank you very much, Meghana. Are there any comments or questions for Meghana? Claire.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question, Meghana, about this series that very sadly resulted in deaths of patients. That's increased quite considerably since last year, and I just wondered what we should take from that.
When patients suffer death as a result of an incident, we do two things. We also complete a structured judgment review for that, and it is often that we decide at the end of that structured judgment review as to whether it becomes a notifiable SIRI or not. I think I note what you're saying in terms of numbers, but I think what the assurance I want to offer is that the medical examiner system will help us identify any shortcomings or failings in the treatment, and to be able to learn from those. I'm not alarmed, Sahir, that we have got an increase in series leading to death that are of concern at the moment.
Thanks, Meghana. I guess it's more valuable to us that things are being reported, because that's what enables us to learn. And of course, the numbers are very small compared to the number of patients we treat and are likely then to be subject to some fluctuations. So we need to keep asking those questions, but also get a sense of perspective. Megan, I'm massively encouraged by this report, and I'm particularly encouraged by the point you make about more things being raised and much more even and widespread engagement of staff with the agenda. So I think, you know, congratulations to everybody for achieving that. I had one minor niggle about this, and it related to the themes for learning and actions from the series involving patients' deaths, and it didn't feel very thematic to me. No, it's really helpful and very reassuring that there's a clear focus on what comes out of these reviews that we should do, and the loop is being closed and you're following up on actions. But most of those things under themes felt quite specific to the place where the accident or the issue emerged, and I just wondered whether we felt we were learning enough about particular series that might prompt us to ask, are there near misses that are happening for similar reasons but in different services? So it didn't feel as thematic as I was imagining to read as I got to that. Yeah,
I completely understand what you're saying, Chair. I think there are two things. One is the constant endeavour to make sure that so firstly, starting with when the incident occurs, the analysis as to whether this could happen anywhere else in the system, in the organisation, and not just on a particular ward, and therefore that itself makes it prone to be called a SIRI because it would have learning across the whole system within the organisation. And then second ambition, or second thing that we really have been trying to do very much, is to make sure that the actions then apply to all areas and are disseminated to every area. So simply because we have changed in neurosurgery the time we administer thromboprophylaxis following an incident in neurosurgery, you know, looking always to say, okay, will that apply to upper GI surgery? Will that apply to orthopedic surgery? And it's not come out in the report, but that's very much what is happening on the floor. And I will make sure that that is highlighted in the reports that come from here on. Thanks, Magda. That's very helpful. Any other questions on this SIRI report? Okay, that takes us to the Guardian of Safe Working Hours, but it doesn't take us away from the Chief Medical Officer, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. So in terms of, I mean, this report is as it is in terms of the analysis, both qualitative and quantitative, in terms of exception reports. Rob Stewart, who's our Guardian of Safe Working, has been meeting and has actually has met with the Junior Doctors Forum as an exceptional meeting recently because of the worries about redeployment. We've been very clear that medical staff are not being redeployed in OUH at present. The exception reporting almost stopped during COVID, but it's resumed, and he has obviously specified in the report and is looking particularly at the cardiology rota, and there is some action on that front locally. I know that Terry's team and my team are working collaboratively to address the concerns raised by junior doctors at every opportunity, really. So I'm happy to take questions, but other than that, it really follows the usual format of the Guardian's report. Thanks very much, Meghana. It's a receive and note item. It didn't look to me as though there was anything flagged up in here where there wasn't also a response flagged up. So I encourage the board to receive and note that. But are there any comments or questions? Thank you. The next item then, Meghana, is learning from deaths. Thank you, Chair. This is the Q1 report, and again, to say that we'd agreed at board that we want to minimise the number of deaths that are pending review at the end of 8 weeks, and I have to say the teams have worked extremely hard during COVID, and despite all the challenges to clinical workflows, they've managed to keep that number down, and there were only, when this report was written, there were only some 31 left to be analysed. As I've just said, we've appointed 7 medical examiners who've started their work, and we'll look to examine all cases as soon as they're able to, in terms of getting their work flows organised. There are, again, clear examples of learning in this. And Anne, following your question at IAC, where I said that in terms of SHIMI, we are as expected, and for HSMR, we are lower than expected. That is, as I said at the time, because of having a hospice on site, and also because of the way the comorbidities are coded. You'll find that the London hospitals code a high Charlson comorbidity index, because one of the things is the deprivation. And if there's a question on the deprivation which asks if people have cars, and of course in London there are many people who don't need a car because of the tube. So there are some reasons like that, which mean that when the coding is done, and also with the hospice not being on site for those hospitals, they come out. And of course, there is some learning from, within different organizations. But if you split our SHIMI data, then our SHIMI data for the Churchill, the John Radcliffe, the NOC obviously is very, very low, and the Horton is lower than expected. And only when we add Sobel House, it suddenly goes to as expected. So I'll stop there, Chair, and again, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Megan. That's very helpful clarification of what was raised at IAC. Okay, it doesn't look as though anybody's picking up questions or clarifications. I mean, I think there are no things that jump out in terms of making us anxious on this, and I think we take assurance from the fact that the medical examiner system will mean that these reviews are more robust than they have been rather than less, so that increases our assurance each time we go around the loop on that. Thank you, Megan. Megan gets a rest now, and we move to item 14, which is the update on the board assurance framework, and there is a decision we are being asked to take on this, which is extending the current assurance strategy and risk management strategy for 12 months, which will enable us to do a fuller review and update. So I'll hand over to Eileen, but someone will remind me I need to make sure that we do take a decision on that at the end of it. Eileen.
Thank you, Chair. It's a short paper because, as the board members will know, this is a very active work programme at the moment through all of the committees, and my thanks to Anne for working with Claire on leading the discussions, feeding on from the reflections at IAC about risk appetite, which we're going through the process of meeting one-to-one with board members on that. So it's just for record in relation to the work that's going on year to date, because we do have a midpoint review requirement as part of our good practice. And the reason for the extension of the strategies is not just to incorporate that feedback, but also to link it very closely to the performance and accountability framework, which is coming through to IAC in December for board in January. And it's to allow us to ensure all three of those are fully aligned, incorporate risk appetite both during COVID and in relation to the strategy and the strategic objectives. So a small decision, please, in relation to the extension for 1 year for the two strategies, and also to note the report.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Given that the board has been around this in the October seminar, there shouldn't be any surprises in this report. It does seem to have taken on the points that we made at that side, invite the board to note that and to agree to the 12-month extension. But I'm very happy to pause for any questions if there are any. Thank you. I think this is the board working effectively, because this is the decision point that reflects a lot of preparation that board members have been involved with going through. So thank you very much for that. That takes us to the Audit Committee Chair's report, which is Paula.
Sorry, thank you very much. So just a few things to note. I've already mentioned the patient experience audit report. We had a really good reports on this committee because there were 3 others in the digital space around data quality, IT procurement, and the COVID-19 IT equipment expenditure. So spend related to supporting our COVID work, and those were all significant assurance with minor improvement opportunities, which was very gratifying. So very positive for David and his team. We are experiencing some difficulties with the audit plan for the year in relation to because of COVID and a couple of reviews where it's not going to be possible for KPMG to do the work on site. So we understood the difficulty. The management are working on the solution at the moment as to exactly what assurance we can provide instead of those two audits, so that we can actually make sure we do get internal assurance. But that's something we will have to look at when management is finished. The board will recall we introduced a protocol a little while ago, a couple of years ago, I think, in terms of how we monitor our overdue internal audit recommendations. We've now supplemented that with a protocol for how we agree to any changes in dates for internal audit recommendations. That protocol is not intended to be added bureaucracy. It's much more about clarity and to keep the process moving, and actually to give us transparency on what's changing. So we're really hopeful that will be adhered to and that the audit committee will therefore have complete visibility on that. One of the other things we do every time is have a report from our counter fraud advisors, in this case TIAA, who are fairly new with us. They started in April, made a very good start. As a committee, we're really conscious that that will work well if the interface between our counter fraud advisors and HR and our people team is really good. And so we focused on that a little bit, and we have asked for a presentation, a combined presentation really between counter fraud and HR at a subsequent meeting, so that we can understand that we are working efficiently between those two teams. And then I think the final thing I would say is we had a good discussion about where we might focus our attention in terms of a deep dive to sort of be really useful and support the work of the committee. And the topic that we're hoping to do is a deep dive on the implementation of digital innovations and lessons learned during the COVID-19 phase. That's through the lens of the audit committee, which means what we're looking at is the framework for managing risk during that process. So I'm really hopeful that will supplement the internal audit reports that we receive by a focused optic on some of the great work that we've been hearing about at the board and at the audit committee on the digital innovations that we've tried to put in place to cope with COVID, but us having a little look at the risk management framework around doing that. So hope to be able to bring some thoughts on that back once the team have worked out when we can schedule that, which obviously is very dependent on people's time to be able to support us in doing that. And that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paula. Are there any questions for Paula? Got off lightly. Hope I get the same on the next one. So the next report is from the Integration Assurance Committee. That committee, of course, includes everybody from the board, so it should be familiar to them. It also includes a lot of material around the COVID response and the integrated performance report that gets onto our agenda anyway, and so we've been discussing further. There were 3 items I'd like to just draw to the board's attention in terms of something that we should perhaps get on the agenda, the minutes noted. The first is around benchmarking. So we had a helpful discussion about how we selected our benchmarks and used them intelligently, and people will see they're working their way into more and more of the integrated performance report. And I guess the flavour of the discussion, just to share with the board, was the difference between the sort of benchmarks which we have now got pretty well embedded around our peer group and the Shelford Trust, which help us understand how we compare to the pack in which we sit. But we're also discussing the possibility of identifying benchmarks which might be more about best in class and stretch possibilities, and they won't necessarily be amongst trusts like us. They may be trusts which are quite different to us but have done particularly well in the areas. So we should expect to be seeing more benchmarking as we work out where that's helpful. Second thing to draw attention to relates to the clinical effectiveness report, and in particular the fact that IAC commended the team on not just being responsive to requirements on reporting, but actually focused on trying to do clinical effectiveness work in a way that would add value to the quality of services. And I think that's a really important thing that we see being done well, that stops this being a bureaucratic exercise and does enable us to deliver better, high quality care. And the final thing is to note that we're undertaking the interim review of the Integrated Assurance Committee's effectiveness, and we agreed a short survey of committee members so that we can take stock. We've set up this committee in an environment which wasn't the one we expected, so it's worked virtually, and we need to take stock of whether that's delivered what we hoped for it and how we can improve things. So the board will hear more about that in due course once the survey's done. IAC has had a chance to digest it, and we may be coming back with proposals for changes, or we may not, depending on the nature of the report, the survey, and whether it leads to changes in just our practice or changes to terms of reference. So those are the three items I felt should draw to your attention. And obviously, as with Paul, I'm very happy to take questions or comments. Thank you very much. And that then takes us on to the TME report, which is Bruno's report. But I don't know whether he'll want to say anything or just invite us to note it. Bruno.
Most of the topics we discussed are on the agenda today, either at the public or private board. If there's any questions regarding key decisions that TME took, I think it's sort of an improvement of the report. They're clearly listed. We also communicate these decisions immediately after TME has met in what we call a TME block, which is sent out to the entire organization to increase the transparency of decision making. But there's a couple of important decisions that were taken since we last met, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bruno. Claire.
Just a quick one. I think I've seen this mentioned a couple of times, but I'm just picking it up here for sort of convenience, really. 3.27, the insurance arrangements. It was mentioned that there are some gaps. Should this be of concern to the board?
Eileen, do you want to come in?
I'm sorry, Claire, could you repeat that? I apologise.
So it's in the report under, it's 3.27. TME received a report that set out current insurance arrangements, identified a number of potential gaps, supported work to draft a policy framework to guide staff who's seeking to place insurance. So that tells us that we're on it on a policy sense, but I think Claire's question is whether those gaps were of sufficient significance that the board should be aware. Jason's put his hand up, Eileen, so I prepared to Jason, and hopefully that absolves you of the need to answer. Jason.
Thank you, Chair. That's because under the SFIs, I'm the exec lead on insurance arrangements, and Eileen kindly actually led on it for a little bit before she reminded me it was my job, and I took it back over. Claire, the audit committee's taken that report as well now and had a chance to scrutinise it. We've looked at, we have pretty comprehensive cover on the face of it in terms of the NHS resolution schemes for clinical negligence, the property expenses scheme for trust and other risks. But we've also identified that some of our Shelford peers have top-up insurance in various areas. We have top-up insurance in various areas, and we're actively checking one or two areas to make sure that we have everything we need. We also are looking at consolidating our brokering arrangements, because actually at the moment what happens is there's quite an ad hoc arrangement for people to go and get top-up insurance. But the board will get its assurance that we are on the case and fixing that via the audit committee reports, where I have an action to bring, I think, the next steps on what we're doing back to audit committee.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, I think then we should move on to the Freedom to Speak Up update. I don't think we need Jane Hervey with us in order to take this agenda item, but I do think it would be appropriate if she's available to invite her in, Eileen. So are you able to tell us whether she's
apologies.
or not?
I can indeed. So apologies, Chair. I was actually trying to dial Jane in the last time, which is why I missed Claire's question. So while Neil is trying to perhaps help me in that, as I was unsuccessful, I can present the report. So Jane was invited and joined us at our last meeting and went through a lot of the detailed work that she's been doing. These two reports are in front of you as part of our
She's
formal.
with us now, Eileen.
Hi, Jane. Sorry,
Well,
Jane. I was failed unsuccessfully in trying to link you in. So Chair, the two reports are in front of us because we have a recommended best practice for receiving these at the board, and it's the output of Jane's work over the last 18 months with board colleagues and the rest of the organisation. But we did think it was important for Jane to be present for those papers, even though she discussed a lot of detail with us all at the previous board meeting. Simply because we have had things like Freedom to Speak Up Month, etc., and we just thought that it afforded board colleagues an opportunity to ask Jane any questions.
Thank you very much, Eileen, and welcome to Jane. I think I want to note, as we've done previously, commending the team for the amount of activity that has happened in very challenging periods in terms of the difficulties of connecting with people during COVID, and the variety of different ways of tackling that, I think, is really important because it makes it much less likely that we're not picking up things. The one thing in it I would be quite interested to have a sense of a bit more clearer sense of how we go about things is the sort of you said we've done bit. So we're working hard to try and give a sense of people that it is important to speak up because things happen when you do speak up. So I'd be quite interested to hear Jane say a bit about how well she thinks that is going. And then I've got a question from Anne. So I just would take Anne's comment question, and then Jane can respond to all of the things we've picked up as a piece. So Anne.
Okay, so mine was a general question, and obviously we're doing a huge amount in this area, and that's demonstrated by the report here. But I mean, I'm not sure what the answer to this is, and Jane, you may be able to have a view, and then maybe it's a staff survey. But how do we get a real sense of the extent to which people feel that they are able to raise issues? Is there one measure, is there one comparison that we could look at to see where we are in that, maybe in comparison with other trusts, but more importantly, really in comparison with ourselves, as to whether we really feel that people are able to raise concerns in the way that we are trying to encourage them to. So there's no lack of effort in trying to get staff to raise issues and concerns, but how do we assure ourselves that we're heading in the right direction?
Thanks, Anne. I'll take Claire's comment and then pass to Jane.
Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, just wanted to say, Jane, you know, there's been a massive amount of really good quality activity here, and I think it is one of those things that you do need to keep the focus on in order to make things work, and I'm really pleased to see that that's happening. Just a specific point, you do mention in the report that there are a number of areas where there are concerns, and I don't want us to breach any sort of confidentiality, and this may not be the right forum, but I think it would be helpful for the board just to sort of understand a bit more in general terms about what those concerns are at some point.
Eileen, did you want to come in before Jane, or shall I hand to Jane? And so Jane, would you like to just pick up those few things?
Yes, thank you. So if I start with Anne's, if that's all right, I do think it in part depends on the area. I think it depends on the area in which staff work, and sometimes it depends on the local managers as to whether people feel that staff can raise concerns. Because if I think back over some of the people that have come to speak to me, the reason they've maybe been to their manager and don't feel that they've had the right response, or they don't feel that they can go to their line manager. And one of the things I would like to say is that what we try very hard not to do is to undermine the line management structure, but there are issues within some of the line management structures. So I can't say to you that I can assure you that we listen to staff everywhere. I think there's pockets where it works exceptionally well and pockets where it doesn't. And I think that's an area that we all have to work on, really. And I think I've probably mentioned this before, but I think sometimes it's hard for people to hear maybe what they don't want to hear, or don't have the skills sometimes to deal with some of these very challenging issues. But it doesn't mean to say that we mustn't do it, because it never goes away, which is what I always say to people, is that we think that we can just ignore it, but it never goes away, and it just gets worse, I think. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think there's more work to do. I certainly could ask, because I'm part of the region of Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, and also I chair the regional group. So I could certainly ask from some of my peers about what they think about your question, Anne, and how they assure themselves of making sure that people do speak up.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I agree with you. I just want to say, I just think it's an area we need to continually work on. As you say, it's never finished, it's never done. Whatever we're doing within the organisation, and we can't come across people or areas where there are issues, we need to pick up on them, as I'm sure we all do. But it's really difficult here. So, you know, you might fill in a form that says yes, you can, but you actually, I don't know. Do you feel that you can? So it's a real challenge for us.
I mean, I think we take comfort from the fact that we did very well in the improvement stakes in the national report. But of course, the improvement is one thing. Getting where we want to be is slightly separate. But it's one of those targets that you never reach, isn't it? You always want to be improving. And if we get to the stage where it looks as though we might be improving and no one feels the need to speak up, we will of course start asking questions about should we be suspicious of that because it looks too successful. So I mean, I think at each stage, what I'm really keen on is the feedback loops, that we are showing that we are listening and that we do something about things. I think that's why I think that you said we did document that went to TME is a really important part of this picture, because why would people tell us things if it doesn't make any difference? So it's really important that we show that.
Absolutely.
Eileen, do you want the last word on this?
Or do you want me to pick up the you said?
Yes, Jane.
So we have done a lot of work on it, and thank you to the executive team for reviewing it and making some comments. So we're just finalising it. It is, as you know, it's quite a long document, but I think it's very important that we do feed that back. And we are also working on a shorter document, hopefully 2 pages. It might be font 11 to get it into the 2 pages. No, I'm joking. Just with the main 5 themes and also the positive comments that were made, so that staff have an opportunity to read the longer document, but also the shortened version as well. And what we're going to do from now on is do themed events. So we're going to do one on home working in November, and Terry has kindly agreed to come to that meeting to support the team, because that's still an issue that's being raised. I've even had somebody contact me this week. So and then we've got OMI who've been pivotal in pulling together the document, who are going to start to produce a document which will come out very soon after each of the events, which I think is key. So.
Thank you very much, Jane. Eileen, last word to you, and then I'm going to try and move on.
So thank you, Chair. As you stated, the survey results tends to be the main indicator used nationally and reflected in the index. But Jane has also brought me ideas around creating much more quick pulse surveys that we do quite rapidly in areas, particularly if we're not getting any issues raised, or where we are getting them continuously raised, and if there's a bit of a theme. So we're going to look at that going forward. I think one of the things that Jane and I have discussed as well is that in some ways you could argue that the success of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian is that eventually there is never a need for it, because actually people feel empowered to speak up. And one of the things we've explored is that quite often we shouldn't confuse, as the national strategy for Freedom to Speak Up develops, speaking up about real significant concerns where you have been blocked in the process was the original premise of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, versus the approach that we've taken and has been encouraged nationally around, yes, tell us about those things, but also it's just about listening. It's about hearing the staff voice, and which is why it links very closely with the Culture and Leadership Programme. And we heavily encourage people to do that. So in some ways that should hopefully push up our contacts, but at the same time, we will look at the ratios of the severity of the issues and the significance of them, and whether or not people are actually being inhibited from dealing with real issues. But Jane keeps a very close finger on the pulse for us, and works very closely with Bruno, myself, and Jonathan and Claire. So I think I take good encouragement from it as we continue to progress it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Jane.
Could I just mention one thing, if that's possible, just to say that the speaking up OUH speaking up policy is due to be renewed and ratified now, but in fact we're waiting for the updated version from the National Guardian. So we've all been asked not to update it until that document has been released. So I don't want you to think that we're not working on it, but it will come to board at some stage in the future.
Thank you very much, Jane. That stops us worrying, lying awake at night, thinking, why haven't we approved that revised policy? Look, I'm immensely encouraged by the steady element of feedback we're getting through Freedom to Speak Up, which suggests it's becoming more and more embedded in our normal ways of working. And I think that's really encouraging, and down to you and your colleagues, Jane, in terms of the effort you've put in. However, I do need to move us on. So thank you very much, Jane. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
The next two items are around maternity, and that takes us to you, Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have a suggestion that I take these papers quite briefly, and the reason for that is we have a focused board seminar session with the maternity team at the end of this month. So I think there's opportunity to ask more detailed question, but maybe if I can just, before we close this section, ensure that the scope of what the board require for that session is understood by me, to make sure that's ready. So 2 papers that need to come through for board assurance for around the maternity incentive scheme. One of them is very detailed, as you can see, which is focused around the 10 maternity safety actions. It's an early update of our current position. There's been fairly significant movement around dates, as you'll see, and there's a current live conversation at the moment as we're in second wave, which has been started by our Northwest colleagues around how we're going to achieve this with everything else. So it's likely, I think, the dates will slip again. So I think for my part in this, I think we should acknowledge the significant work that the team have put into to this, particularly in relation to continuity of carer, and I think the impressive work of the Lotus team. But more importantly, I think there's the assurance around the significant oversight and monitoring, and that's predominantly through Eileen's team, and I meet with them as maternity board champion. So I think there's lots to discuss within that, but if I can take that maybe later in the month with the wider team for a more detailed discussion, that might be more appropriate.
Thank you very much, Sam. I would support that. I mean, my main sense of lack of sight in relation to the seminar is I don't have as much understanding of the feedback we have from women and the ways in which women feed into our decision-making processes as I feel I ought to have. So a better understanding of that from the seminar I would find really helpful.
Of course, yeah. So we have a maternity voices group, so I can certainly bring, and we'll think offline about how we best bring that in. We might even invite somebody from that group for a short period. And I know you also wanted to consider caesarean section, an update to the board that Megan and I will get ready for the board around caesarean section for non-medical reasons.
Indeed, thank you. Other thoughts on the seminar can be fed, I think, to Sam, so we don't need to air them now. Are there any comments or observations on the paper for today? In fact, the 2 papers really, because the
second 2 papers, again, are required to come through board to give assurance around a system for midwifery workforce planning and monitoring of staffing, which I think speak to themselves. So I can leave that there, and we're in a good position. We're fully established with midwives, and probably the other thing to mention is you all have seen, hopefully, that Wantage reopened this week as well with a socially distanced mayor.
Thank you. So that's good news. So I think what we take in relation to the incentive scheme update report, we note that there are plans against all those things which are not compliant. And in relation to the staffing annual report, we recognise that we're actually in quite a good place compared to where many places are. And I think credit to the team for recruitment and retention on that. OK, I'm going to move us on then to flu vaccination. I don't know if Meg or Sam is going to start on this.
Thank you, Chair. This is simply the checklist as an update to the paper that was presented to IAC last month. And this checklist needs to be submitted to NHS England. As an update on the flu vaccination program, since we started on September 28th, we are over 50% in terms of vaccinating our frontline staff, which is some 9% higher than we were this time last year in our flu program. We've obviously, like all other hospitals, I think major providers, there's been a gap in the supply. So we lost 2 weeks. We've now received the next batch of vaccines, and our fantastic circa 170 ward vaccinators are using that all up rapidly. So that's all really, Chair, about this checklist.
Thank you very much. So I think the board has noted that. We also note the consultant appointments and the signing documents. I don't have any other business notified. Neil, has anything come in during the meeting I need to know about?
No, Chair, nothing has been notified to me.
Thank you. Our next public meeting is on Wednesday, the 13th of January. Colleagues will know that we now close the public meeting. We do have a confidential business meeting this afternoon. I gave you 2 extra minutes for coffee. I've now taken 4, so I'm now in debt. So I owe you 2 minutes. I will see you again at 1 o'clock. We are reconvening for the Part 2 business. Thank you very much for those governors who joined us. And this is the end of the Part 1 meeting. Thank you.